Today is Monday, April 14th, 2025. This is Karen Bluestone representing the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives as a volunteer from the Learning Center Senior Citizens, Inc. I'm interviewing Sally Rountree Klein for the Everyone Has a Story project through the Savannah Community Memory Project. We are conducting this interview at Sally's home. Thank you for joining us today. So Sally, would you give us your name and spell it for us, please?
Glad to. Sally, S-A-L-L-Y, Rountree, R-O-U-N-T-R-E-E, Klein, like Calvin without the money, K-L-E-I-N.
Thank you. So why don't we just start at the beginning? Where were you born?
I was born here in Savannah, and usually I'm the only one in the room that was born here in Savannah. So I wear that as a badge of honor, and I'm really glad I'm from this beautiful city that other people have now discovered. It's changed quite a bit since I was born. Like most babies, white babies of my generation, I was born at Telfair Hospital, which is now a building that still is on Forsyth Park, but is used for another purpose. It's no longer a hospital. So I think there's actually a group of what they call the Telfair babies in Savannah. So I don't remember my mother bringing me home, but I do have an early memory that surprised her. The first memory I've had was of my father holding me as an infant, lowering me into the pedestal bathroom sink. Those tiny little sinks that they used to have in older houses. And I can remember looking down and seeing my little legs and knees, fat little thighs, dropping below me, and I was so scared that I was going to fall to the floor. And then he just gently put me down in the warm water. And his hands were big enough so that they went from under my arm to, the bottom of my torso. And so I must have been very tiny then. And when I shared that memory with my mother, she said, "You were not even 6 months old." And so I've tried to keep that memory alive. And I know there's a lot of discussion about are such memories really true or are they invented? But I think because I felt the fear, I think it's probably a real memory. And another early memory was looking out my crib, pulling up on the crib, looking out the bedroom window at my older sister, who was lounging herself on a blanket in the backyard in the stunning and sexy sunsuit. She was 2, and it was red and white striped with red crocheted trim around the ruffles across the little bottom of it, the butt of it. And later on in childhood, probably somewhere between 7 and 9 years old, I was telling Mom about that. And she said, "Sally, you weren't even 6 months old. That's incredible." So she verified that scene and that happened when Susan was wearing that. And I remembered wearing that same sunsuit later. So now at 71 years old, I'm not sure my memory is as sharp as it was when I was a baby, but I do enjoy hanging on to the ones that I do have, and I share them with so much pleasure, and thank you for asking me to do that.
So were you from a big family?
I am from a big family. I think by today's standards, at least, I'm one of 6 kids. I'm the second child, second daughter, and the first son. And when my younger brother came on the scene, he did everything that I wanted to do better as a boy because I was a big tomboy. So we found out our competition a long, long time ago, and we're good buds now. We're good friends, so I'm grateful for that. But an older sister than me, then a brother, then a sister, and a son. So I was kind of the helper mom to my youngest brother, and she was very ill by then. When he was a child. So I did a lot of things with him when I was 14 and 15. Well, she passed when I was 27, so he was only 14 I'm sorry, 13 when she passed away. So we have a special closeness that I cherish as well. I wanted to share a memory with you about my 3rd grade teacher, Ms. Blumenfeld. Miss Blumenfeld was just so sweet. We all loved her. And we moved as a group. The kids, of course, were grouped by their academic abilities. And we were a great class. We had the misbehaving miscreants and the rebels, and then we had the little pleasers who wanted to get everything perfect like me. But we all came together over Miss Blumenfeld. She was so sweet. She was an older lady, and I never saw her get angry. In fact, one day I just heard her say, "Now, class, if you can't settle down," and I'm thinking, what are you going to do, Miss Blumenfeld? Give us paper to draw on for an hour? You know, that's one thing we did. We'd do art a lot in the classroom with her. And, what's it going to be? And she never finished the sentence, of course, because she didn't have to, because we wanted to please her. Well, after third grade, I and several friends would go back to her room after school every day to wash her blackboards. And believe me, that was a position of honor, and you fought for that position. Well, she wasn't there, which was so unusual. She was never absent. And then she came back, and she was okay, and all was good. But in fifth grade, we continued to go back. And I was a little hesitant because I thought, it's time for me to let this go and let the other kids have their time with her who are coming after fourth grade. But because she wasn't there for 2 days, I was a little concerned. And then I asked the substitute teacher, is she okay? And she said, well, she's sick, but she's coming back. Well, that afternoon I was walking home from school, and I remember exactly where I was. I was walking past the cyclone fence around the playground, and I lived in East Savannah on a little tiny one-block street named Seam Place. It was between Bonaventure Road and Massachusetts Avenue. So I cut through the East Side neighborhood there, and it was about, I think, 6 minutes after 3, to my reckoning, I knew that she had died. And her voice came to me and said, "Don't worry, Sally, I'm fine. I'm okay. And all is well. Everything is okay. And I'm happy. And you take good care of yourself," like a little goodbye message. And this peace and calm came over me like none other. And when I got home, I knew how long it took me to walk, so I knew that my thought, it must be about 6 minutes after 3. It was only a block and a half from the house. It was probably pretty accurate. Didn't say anything to anybody but my older sister, who was my confidant. And that was late at night after we had lights out. We shared a bedroom. The next morning, the principal came on the intercom and said she was so sorry to inform us that Miss Blumenfeld had passed away yesterday afternoon, a little bit after 3 o'clock. And what a beautiful, beautiful gift that was for me to have that contact from her. I've had some other experiences like that. In fact, I'm writing a book about it. In fact, when I was 4 years old at my birthday party, there was a group of my sister and 3 little hateful boys from the neighborhood were waiting for our ice cream and cake. We were sitting out on the front lawn. And all of a sudden, I just felt myself leave out of the top of my head. And I was up over the group of kids, and I was looking down from about 12 feet high. And I knew what everyone was going to say before they said it. And everything that I thought they were going to say, they said. And then I realized, they're looking at my body down there. They're expecting me to participate and say something. I better go back into my body. And so I did, and the other kids never seemed aware of it. And I was glad, because I figured this might not be the thing you want to share with your friends when you're 4 or 5 years old. And I didn't mention it to anyone. It wasn't scary. It just seemed like the way things are. But a little bit later, I was probably 7, I said that to Mom, what had happened. And all she said was, "Oh, you have that too," which totally normalized it. And it was okay. We didn't even talk about it. So experiences like that have really shaped me. And they really came back with a roar in my later years, probably because I knew more people who passed. But those things shaped my belief system, and I have no doubt that there's an afterlife because of those things. So
that's a pretty amazing journey.
It is
really.
Very amazing.
And it sounds like you're still having it.
I am having it, yeah. And At one point, I asked for, I'm a teacher and practitioner of Carl Jung's philosophy, and I'm licensed to give people the Myers-Briggs, which is based on his work. And at one point in my life, I asked for a certain type, which is my complement, PLE, to enter my life because I was seeking to complete myself. And I went to this church, and I was a member, and I was on the board and all of that. And at one point, I was teaching and doing the facilitation of the inventory for any members that wanted to come. And everyone there turned out to be my complementary type, so I got my wish. And I learned so much from folks who helped me with that. Of course, they didn't know that they were helping me so much. I just loved them dearly. And, it's so nice to have that little seed of information to help you along the way. One thing I wanted to mention to you was my exquisite experience being in the first class of white kids to go to a historically black high school. We learned, I had been in high school 1 year, and I went to Jenkins High School on Durant Avenue, which was kind of the premier high school academically at the time. And every day my parents drove me past Johnson High School because I couldn't go there. It was close to our house because it was a black school. And so we got letters this summer, in the summer of 11th grade, rising juniors.
What year is this?
This is 1969. That we were being transferred to Johnson and where to report and all of that. Well, the phone lines are buzzing, all summer. So the new catchment area for the school went all the way out to the ocean. So it was Tybee and all the islands and Thunderbolt, and a few neighborhoods close to the Thunderbolt city border, town border with Savannah. Of course, people were nervous and they were scared because this had never been done before. We didn't know what would happen and how we'd be received. And I remember my mother telling me, just be nice to everyone and they'll be nice to you. She was right. But I don't want to gloss over, it was not without challenges. And having talked to some of my black friends that I made there at the school much later in life, I learned things I'd never known about and how it was not so wonderful for them because of the treatment some of the white kids gave them, which was very disheartening. My mom and my father both were liberal Christians, as I think I mentioned, and one thing that they were very liberal on was civil rights. One of my most enlightening memories was when one of my younger siblings was born. My grandmother, my mother's mother, wanted to hire a helper to come and help her for, a few days after she came home from the hospital. We never had a quote made, and so this was unusual. There was a woman that my grandmother knew named Sadie that we all adored. She was wonderful, but she was never our maid because my mother would never have a maid. She just didn't believe in that. And so she sent this young woman, grandmother did, to help Mom. And I remember, I think it might have been my sister Lynn, who is 5 years younger than me. The young lady came and set up lunch at the table, but she wouldn't sit down with us and eat. My mother said, please sit with us and, have a sandwich. And she said, oh, no, ma'am, I can't do that. But she made a sandwich and carried her plate out to the back porch and sat on the steps going up to the porch. Well, my mother, I've never seen that gathered skirt swish so fast. She took her plate, and I heard her say outside, if you cannot sit with us, then I will sit with you. And sat with her and got to know her a little bit. So these kinds of experiences really shaped me. My father was the same way. He lived his faith. This is germane to the story, Daddy's brothers on the farm where he grew up, he was one of the younger ones, and they always liked to mess with him, the bigger brothers. And when he was 7, they gave him a rifle and told him to shoot the phone wire on a dare, to see if he could do it, because he knew he was a good shot. He did on the first try, shot at the phone line and cut it. with a rifle, not a shotgun, because that goes everywhere. This was a rifle. So he had the skill. He was classified as a sharpshooter, basically, in ROTC in high school. Well, fast forward, Daddy's job, his career, was as a train dispatcher for Seaboard Coastline Railroad. Their offices were located on West Broad Street, Martin Luther King Boulevard now. This was right at the time when Martin Luther King had been assassinated. I was in high school, and I just thought the world was ending. Having grown up with the Kennedy assassinations and the Ohio State events, I just thought, I'll never go to school, I'll never go to college, I can't, it's not safe, Well, there were demonstrations that first night on Martin Luther King Boulevard, and it was a lot of tension in the city and restlessness and lots of rumors going on. And the rumor was that they were going to be armed. The crowd was going to be armed the next night. And my mother begged Daddy not to go to work. He worked 3 to 11 shift, and his office was right there in the midst of it. And we were all so worried about him going, but he said, "No, I'm going to work." Well, all the other men, and understand, only white men could be dispatchers at that time. And so there he was with his fellows in that office working that night. And they had all promised they were bringing their own guns to work that second night. And these men, I knew them as a child. I grew up with them. They were not hateful or avenging. They were family men who were terrified, who wanted to defend themselves from any attacks. And Daddy said, sharpshooter that he was, I will not bring a gun because these men are brothers, my brothers. And when he used that word in front of me, it was such galvanizing language for this sweet Daddy, so introverted and shy, to use. It just awakened me to something so much bigger than I had lived in the past. He said, I will not bring a gun to do anything against my brothers who are only wanting what we take for granted. I'll never forget his words. So he went to work, and we were so nervous. And I had the wonderful privilege to stay up late and wait for him to come home at 11:15 every night and sit up, and we'd have popcorn and watch Johnny Carson together. All the other children were asleep or frantically doing their homework at the last minute. Well, Daddy did something he'd never done before. He called at supper time, which was usual. But then he called as he was getting off work, and I could hear his voice shaking, and he said, I'm going to the car now, and I'll see you in 15 minutes. So I knew something was wrong. I had not spent a longer 15 minutes in my life, and Mom was up this night with me. So we heard the garage door open with great relief and heard his steady footsteps coming up the stairwell, and there was Daddy, and he looked so ashen and just weakened, and I knew something had happened. He walked in and he didn't put anything down, he didn't take his jacket off, he just sat down, and he said, they shot at us. And I felt the bullet. I felt it whiz right past my head, and the bullet lodged in the wall behind my chair. What a moment. We could have easily have lost him. But yet he refused to arm himself. Still, he would not. And he went right back to work the next day. And that was the kind of man that he was. And, that has colored my approach to life in so many different ways. To really have a faith system, to have ethics, to follow them, no matter the expense to you. And, I got profound lessons from both of my parents on that subject. So I'm proud to say I'm a Johnson Atom smasher. which gets a lot of ribbing.
You want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think they were named themselves the Atom Smashers because it's the partner school with Savannah State College. So that was a scientific reference, of course. And, I guess they didn't want to be the Wildcats or whatever, which I loved it. But they had the big muscular arm out in front with a hammer breaking the atom. They had the old Bohr model, which we all learned about the atom and how the electrons were spinning around it. I think it's great. And actually, when you sing the school anthem, you do your arm like this, like you've got that hammer and you're smashing the atom when you sing.
Do you remember the anthem?
Yes, but I can't sing it right now. But it's not to equal but excel is the first line. I was in the chorus, so we had to learn it and do the deal and raise our arms and all of that, and it was a great experience. So I learned a lot. I learned more socially and culturally than I did academically. I was shocked at the lack of equipment the school had compared to what I was used to at my white school. My favorite teacher, who was white, because I didn't have anything but white teachers, volunteered to teach there in the year before it integrated. That was one of the things that they did. And I later found out that a good friend that I made there, his name was Julian Williams, who was black. His mother was a professor at Savannah State, and later on she told me how she was part of the very careful plan to integrate that school. They were very careful about the catchment area and about making sure, this was always, I thought, without knowing this, a feature of why it was successful. There was not any contrast economically, because the black children that came were middle class, the white children that came were middle class. So it was not like upper class whites versus very poor, underprivileged black kids, which would just, of course, increase the cultural gap. So it was well planned. There were no riots. I know some people were not treated well, which was shameful, but I was treated well, and I made some good friends, and actually my husband's boss was one of the friends I made there, so Charlene told me a lot about it from her perspective. She was a year younger than me. So it was a good experience.
And what came after that?
Well, after that, I went to Armstrong, having no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. Bored to tears. I was an honor student. I hated school. I did not quit high school just because I didn't want to embarrass my parents. Just bored to tears. So I figured the best way out, because my mother did not think I could live with even girlfriends in an apartment. And that I could only, she told me I had to be married in order to leave. So I married the son of her best friends, my parents' best friends, and I thought, this is not consciously. I was in love. He was handsome, smart. He was a writer. He was a reporter for the Knoxville Journal, the Journal. And, he was more worldly than I. He was 21. So we got married, but my mother knew something was wrong, and she told me the night before, I'll stand by you if you want to cut and run, which I couldn't do that, and I didn't want to because I loved Bill. But she was right. We were not ready to be married, so that marriage did not last long. But the thing that did help me to grow even more than the marriage did was I worked for almost 3 years at the Knoxville Psychiatric Hospital, Eastern State Psychiatric Hospital, and it had beautiful grounds on the side of the river that ran through town. A gorgeous campus, but a horrific place. There were probably thousands of people that lived there. I happened to be trained, and I was trained and got a pharmacology certificate so I could give shots and medication as well as direct care. And I ended up, after working in every single building as part of the training, I worked in admissions, which was a huge misnomer because there were people who lived in those buildings their whole lives. The probably the most standout story I had was when a new admission was brought in, and he was very unruly and fighting and everything, and he was He was brought in by two of the male attendants, but the sheriffs also walked in with him, and that was unusual. They usually turn him over at the door. Of course, it was a locked ward. And I was supposed to give the medication. The two guys who were friends of mine, we had been trained and gave demonstrations. How do you take a patient to the floor without hurting them? So I was trying to give him the shot, and he pushed me backwards and turned around and slapped my friend and pushed him through the bathroom door. So we had to call the one RN who was on duty for the building, 8 wards of 30 patients, one nurse, to come give the shot. So Sally, at 104 pounds then, could add weight and keep him down and hold on to his legs. Well, we did that, and I'm riding his legs, not holding him down like I should, and he kicks me off, and I land on the concrete floor on my knees. Well, I couldn't get up because I looked down and my kneecap was on the side of my leg, on the outer side of my leg. And I was just trying to protect my stomach because he was kicking me. So the nurse kicked him in return, which caused a crowd to gather. And there was a man who had not been admitted very long. He took his belt off. I remember looking up off the floor. He was slinging it. He had a huge buckle. I don't know why they didn't take it from him on admission. He said, "No one kicks a friend of mine." And I figured, 20, I wasn't expecting to die this soon, but I really thought he was going to kill me, stomp my head or something. And the nurse kept calling for security. Nobody ever came. No one ever came. Eventually, somehow, we got it under control. And the guys lifted me up by my elbows and carried me on one leg into the chart room. And I just said, well, that's got to be done. And I took my kneecap and moved it over and snapped it back into place. So I worked there almost 3 years, and after some incidents like that, it was time for me to go on to the other side of the desk or else leave, one of the two. And I left to go work on a migrant farm and clear my head. And I worked there for a season. I left and went up in the mountains and worked on the farm there.
What were you picking?
I was not actually picking white women. Whites were not allowed to pick, only Mexicans. But I was sorting and packing the tomatoes. That's the best job I've ever had. I watched this culture of Appalachian people and the Mexicans working so hard. And some of them were educated. Some of them were teachers who were packing over the summer to earn extra money. But others were very uneducated. So the first night I was there, you work around this U-shaped contraption that sorts the produce and the tomatoes into sections. And they're small, which are actually cherry-sized, medium, which are actually big cherry-sized, and large and extra large, so that you get an equal shot at packing different sizes, because you were paid 11 cents per pound. And, 11 cents, that's right, per 22-pound box. Now, as a novice, I was not nearly as fast as some of the other ladies. So I was kind of slow. I never got to minimum wage. But boy, did I learn and watch. The very first night, there was a man who stood in the middle and moved the dividers to make sure everyone had an equal shot at the sizes of tomatoes. And while you're packing, you scoop with one hand, and then you're standing at a little cart that has a slanted top. And on the upper right corner was a spike that held tissues. You had to wrap each tomato in a tissue. And then by the size they were, there was a uniform way to pack them so that you reached your 22 pounds without error. You had to initial it and put it on the conveyor belt. And they weighed it. If it was wrong, it came right back to you. So I was busy doing that, but I was looking at this little old man standing in the middle wondering who he was. He wore a little railroad cap. He was in his 80s. The noise in there was the machinery. You couldn't hear anything. And you couldn't talk or do anything like that. But I looked up. He was not much further away from me than you are. And he was like being shocked, electrically shocked. And to see that so close, and then he dropped to the floor. And I could hear a man yelling, "Turn it off!" And then everybody, that makes me cry right now, started yelling, "Turn it off, turn it off." Nobody could hear us. And finally they shut it off. And I've never seen people move so fast. Those men picked him up, put him in the back of a flatbed pickup truck, and went speeding down that driveway and down the mountain and into the closest town, which was a good 25, 30 minutes away. He came back to work the next day, and that is their work ethic. So to watch people live in such poverty and to still be hard workers and do their jobs and do what they're supposed to do was just an incredible lesson for me, just to be part of it. I learned a whole lot about being paid for what you produced. It was a pittance for sure, but I could sit on my butt all night at the psychiatric hospital and get paid the same as the person who, if I wanted to, I didn't do that, as the person who was busy bathing patients and doing counseling and everything else. It didn't matter, you got paid the same. So that's why I call it my best job. I decided it was time to go back to college then, and I did. And I went to the former Teachers College, East Tennessee State University. I was so ready to learn. It had been quite a while since I'd been in school by then. I just ate it up with sugar, like they say down south. And I was an honor student. I worked full-time, 3 to 11 in a nursing home. I got a Pell Grant. By then I was in my early 20s, and my dad had to fill out a paper. I was too old for him to call me his dependent, but I had my salary, and it was like $2,000 for the last year. And he said, "Hart, how did you live on that?" I mean, he didn't know what I was being paid, and he couldn't believe it. So I did get the Pell Grant, but I'm still working minimum wage and wiping butts in a nursing home until I graduated. I also worked as a tailor. I tailored men's suits. I did displays and sold my handmade jewelry in a little shop that I worked in. So there were a lot of little pickup jobs along the way. But after I graduated, I stayed in Knoxville a little while trying to find the next good job. But since I graduated in August, all the teaching jobs were taken. And that fall, it was a good thing because Daddy called me and said, "Your mother's cancer has gone to her liver. When can you get here?" He didn't say, "Can you come?" So I packed up and I moved back to Savannah to help take care of her. And she passed away the first week of my real teaching job that I got. I started in February. I was the 5th teacher those kids had. It was a very underprivileged school in a part of town I'd never been in. Some of my students were 18 years old and in the 8th grade. But I applied the lessons I learned at college about how to manage it, and it worked. And the assistant principal would come and look in my class because everyone was working on something different. It was a 3-ring circus, but it was manageable, at least for me. But that kept them interested instead of trying to teach the same lesson to everybody because everybody wasn't in the same place. So she died that September. And I learned later that the ladies in the office had bets on how long I would last in the job. But I made it to the end of the year, so I was the winner of that competition. I didn't know that at the time. But so she did pass away then, and it was very, very difficult for everybody, of course. She was so young, she was just 50. But I stayed on, and then the next year, I think this is hilarious. I was in a science teacher's meeting. That's what I was teaching. And my old science teacher from 7th grade was there. And they call your name. So, they called my name and I was like present. And the meeting was in my 9th grade science teacher's classroom, and I was scared to death of her. And she was there handing out papers, and it was like, oh no, here she comes down the aisle. I started shrinking up like I was 14 years old again. It was kind of funny. So Miss Peterson came to me as the meeting was closing, and she said, "Sally, I don't know if you remember me." I said, "Of course I do, Miss Peterson." She hadn't changed a bit. She said, "I still have your science fair paper on the bulletin board." And I said, I'm such a smart ass. I said, Miss Peterson, it's time to change your vote. Instead of taking it for the compliment that it was, she said, I'm retiring next year, and at the end of this year, and I want you to have my job. I'm going to talk to the principal tomorrow. So I got recruited to go there, and it was a wonderful school. The principal was a fabulous person. I had kids who couldn't read, and I had brilliant kids. They're all together, 5 hours a day, out of 6 classes. And I loved it. And I can remember standing before them thinking, I would rather be here than anywhere, including walking the beach and feeling the sun on my back. This is where I'm intended to be. And I loved them, and I think they loved me. And I actually became Teacher of the Year for the county. And somebody nominated me, I didn't apply. And then I moved on and became the Georgia Science Teacher of the Year. And I was given presidential award nominations. There were only 100 people in the country. You had to show the results with your kids and so forth. So that kind of honor meant a lot to me. And I share that not to brag, but to say, you can start out with a lot of challenges, but you just work through them and follow what you've been taught, and it will work for you. I remember one time, how's my time, by the way? I'm doing okay?
Well, we're doing okay, but...
Wind it up?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this will be a good story to wind up with.
A good story.
I had a student who was not doing his work, and I was always about public praise, private correction. So I walked over and I whispered, it's time to start your work. And sometimes I would give them quiet time work like that. And a lot of times it would be group work though. Well, he stood up and pushed his chair back and threw his book on the floor and screamed, I hate science. And as a new teacher, that's a real challenge because you're not sure if you can handle it, And I immediately took the at ease position. I put my hands behind my back and spread my feet a little bit. And of course, you could hear a pin drop because they were like, what's all Rountree going to do now? And I said, I know you do. And that's okay. But the reality is, you got to pass this class to get out of here. So I'm gonna make you an offer. I will do everything I can do to make this class interesting and fun for you. And all I ask from you is, if I'm not doing something you need me to do, will you tell me? Will you let me know what I need to do? Well, I saved face for him. He sat down and he started his work. And I put my arm around him. Back in those days you could. And I said, thank you so much. I found out his mother had given him away the day before and put him in an orphanage. Mm. And the orphanage was not far. It was St. Mary's. It was on Victory Drive. I went to every single event they had there. I was there for him. And he came back to see me every day after school for the next 3 years until he joined the military. That's why we teach. That's what's important.
Mm. Well, I want to thank you for this.
Sorry.
It's wonderful stories and more to come, I think.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.